All right. Good morning and welcome back. I hope that your week has been going well so far. We are now in week 2 of the term, so hopefully things have started to settle down. You've got a bit more of a schedule for your courses, and you kind of have some things in place. So now that we've had the chance over the course of our first week of classes to go over a variety of different types of ways of doing theory, analyzing theory, the purpose of theory, from now until the end of the term, each class we are going to be spending on a different communication theory. So we will be kicking things off today with symbolic interaction theory. It's a really good starting point and a good way to apply some of the things that we've discussed so far. So we'll be getting into the nitty-gritty of that in just a moment. As a quick recap of last class, we talked about what communication is and why it matters. We looked at some of the major models of communication, including the ways that we utilize the linear, transactional, and interactive models. And we also explored some of the ways that we utilize different traditions and contexts as a means of doing communication theory too, right? So we were explaining last class what communication theory is and how in the study of communication, right, there are a variety of different ways we can go about asking questions and different situations in which communication occurs. So these traditions, right, include rhetorical, the use of persuasion, semiotic, the use of signs and symbols, phenomenological, the use of how we come to understand meaning, cybernetic, the challenges of transmitting messages in the role of noise, socio-psychological, cause-effect relationships. If we, play video games, become violent, according to some. Sociocultural, understanding our role in society, and critical, examining the role of power. So each of the theories we go over in this class will be related to at least one tradition. And then at least one context is going to be relevant to these theories too. So for example, today's theory will connect very closely to elements of interpersonal communication being between two people, intrapersonal communication with yourself. So oftentimes you will see intra and interpersonal being used together. A small group deals with an organization or collective of people, generally about 3 to 12. Organizational looks at a larger group or setting. Public rhetorical deals with reaching a large audience. Mass media refers to the use of things such as television, press release, social media to reach a large audience. And cultural refers to the overall messages, beliefs, values, and ideas that tend to reach a large audience. We also discussed the idea that theory, right, is about the relationship between concepts that are helping us to understand something, right? So the Big Bang Theory is an example of a theory that's trying to explain the origin and creation of the universe. No theory is entirely perfect, right? The entire idea behind a theory, as opposed to something like a law, right, is that it's meant to constantly evolve, change, develop, be critiqued, perhaps thrown out entirely. So for today, I want to spend some time making sure everybody's on the same page about some of the upcoming assignments in the course and what to know in preparation for those. We'll also take some time to get into symbolic interaction theory, our first theory in class. So thank you. I think just about everybody completed the week 1 quiz on Canvas. So all of the quizzes are already available for you to take for all the weeks. So you'll notice that the link to the week 2 quiz is available, so you have access to completing that too. So if you want to work ahead, you can, but just know that the week number 2 quiz is due by this Sunday. So you'll notice the week 2 quiz is right here. So the week number 2 quiz, right, is covering content from the chapters that we're going over this week. So Weston Turner chapters 15, 5, and 6. We jump ahead a little bit to symbolic interaction, chapter 15, but it is very relevant and closely tied to 5 and 6. So I've clustered them together. Remember that starting this week, you are going to need your own access to the textbook. I highly encourage that you use the link that I've included on Canvas announcement for renting the ebook. That's a really easy way to get instantly. You can also get it from the EOU bookstore or place an online order for a physical copy. If you are running into issues with accessing your own copy of the book, please let me know so that you can continue to work through some of the readings and these assignments. So week 2 quiz, it's due on Sunday. And then we also took some time to talk about the theory reflection assignment, right? That is due 2 weeks from today at the end of week 3, so on April 23rd. And as a reminder, I'm asking you to pick one of the theories that we talk about in the first few weeks and to take some time to explain some of the ways that this theory is relevant to your life experiences. So for instance, we'll be going over symbolic interaction theory today, which would be a great candidate for this assignment too. And know that the rubric and all the expectations for this one are right here. Again, I'm happy to look over rough drafts, outlines, or anything else. The other thing that I wanted to direct you to was the presentation assignment in the course. So this is something that will start to be incorporated about a week or two from now. And the idea is we'll be having the chance to hear from other folks in the class as the term continues. So basically, for the class presentation, I have a Google form that you can use. And the idea here is that by the end of this week, everybody is going to be assigned a date and be assigned a theory, right? And the idea here is that on the scheduled presentation date, you're going to be giving a short presentation where you're bringing in an outside scholarly article, so something that is not from the Weston Turner textbook, that uses the theory that you've been assigned in some way, right? So I'm not asking you to explain like what symbolic interaction theory is. Instead, I'm asking you to explain how this outside article is, first of all, adding to our understanding of the world, how this article is utilizing this theory, and what knowledge we're gaining from that, right? So you're welcome to start to look at sources through things like the Google Scholar, EOU Library database, and so on. So you will know by the end of this week what your assigned theory is and what date you're scheduled to present. So if you click here on the front page of Canvas to the presentation availability form, I ask you to include your name. I ask you to list out the dates that you are or are not able to present. And then as you're looking through the theories, and you might, if you wanted to, take a quick leaf through some of the theories and what those theories get into. If there are particular theories that catch your eye that you're interested in and you want to be assigned to do, you're welcome to indicate any preferences. You don't have to. If you're like, I don't care, just put me in to whatever I can make my schedule, then we can do that. So I just ask you to check off based on extracurriculars, travel, and your availability, the dates that you know you will be able to attend versus the dates that you know or think that you might not be able to attend. That way we can make sure that the presentation schedule is done in a way that honors your travel restrictions and availability. So that's there. So for today, in the first week, we're not going to be going over or having any student presentations, but I wanted to give you an example of the way you might incorporate an outside article. And later this week, I'll give you an example of how you might utilize this presentation assignment too, right? So today, for symbolic interaction theory, if you were presenting today and asked to share an outside article, perhaps you might share this one, which is symbolic interactionism as an approach to the study of human communication, right? This is an outside journal article. This comes from the Quarterly Journal of Speech, which is a major, considered to be kind of the premier journal in communication studies, and is very widely circulated and examined, right? And this one is looking at symbolic interaction theory and applying symbolic interaction theory to the way that we do communication. For instance, it's talking about some of the ways in which our culture and our behavior is developed through the process and use of symbols. And you might take some time to explain what Littlejohn is adding to our overall understanding of the theory, right? The way that these presentations will work in the class is I will, earlier in the class, give kind of the explanation and overall sort of take on what this theory is and how this theory works. And then things will be opened up to you to share and to give your presentation. So you should assume when you're giving the presentation that people do know what the theory is about by that point. So you don't have to backtrack and explain what the theory is. Instead, explain what this outside article is bringing in and adding. So you're welcome to take some time if you have extra time during class today, or you have time after class. I just ask that you try to get this in by the end of the day on Friday, so that we can get the presentation schedule set up. Any questions about anything related to the course, any of these assignments, or anything else as we're getting rolling? Great. If questions do come up, please let me know. And remember that you are always able to access the recordings and slides from previous class meetings if there's anything that you're in need of catching up on. So when it comes to searching online, you might use EOU library database. You might also use JSTOR, right? So JSTOR, JSTOR is a really great source in terms of finding resources. EOU also has a JSTOR database that you can use. And JSTOR not only allows you to do some searches, but it has a really cool feature called the JSTOR text analyzer. So basically what the text analyzer does is if you paste like a few paragraphs or you paste a few words, what it does is that it finds searches and it finds results that match the keywords or things that you entered into the search, right? So if I were to enter something like symbolic interaction theory and communication studies, right? It's looking at the keywords, it's comparing the keywords and identifying relevant topics. So this is a really good way to get things started. It's helping us, for example, to kind of pare down. So I might put greater prioritization on communication theory and allows you to eliminate and check off what is or is not relevant to what you want to search. So that's a really good resource, and I'm happy to help if you're running into issues finding your outside source too. So let's get started with symbolic interaction theory. For each of the theories of the class, I'm going to be giving kind of an application or example of this theory. I think it's useful for us to understand the basics, but I also think it's good for us to look at a real world practical application or example. Sometimes this is like a case study, something that's happened in history. Sometimes it's an example like a television show or film, right? A mediated example. Sometimes it's some type of phenomenon, but what I like to do is give examples of some of these theories in action so we can understand and explain some of the ways that they work. So the basics of symbolic interaction theory are very simple. As we talked a little bit about when we were discussing semiotics, it's about how we're using symbols to create and maintain a sense of the world. In other words, we are motivated to communicate, to detain, and interact with other people based on the symbols that we have developed and created, right? So in terms of tradition, this is semiotic and phenomenological. Semiotic, again, being about the use of signs, phenomenology being about how we come to know and understand from our own perspective what the world is. It fits within the subfield or context of intrapersonal and interpersonal communication. We use symbolic interaction when we're engaging with ourselves and when we're talking to other people. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of these approaches, right? But you have a more positivistic or scientific approach. You have the more interpretive and hermeneutic approach, right? Where you're trying to make sense of and understand the world. And then the critical approach that's generally about interrogating power. And in this case, this fits more in the interpretive approach. We're using this theory to try to understand and make sense of human experience. For the application, I really like to use the example of the Disney Pixar film Inside Out. I'll share a clip from that in just a little bit, but it's a really good example of how symbolic interaction theory is used to make sense of meaning. So every time we go into a theory, right, a theory brings with it a set of assumptions or beliefs about the world, beliefs about how we communicate. Again, you can think about the theory like a pair of glasses. When you put on the pair of glasses, you're looking at the world in a very specific way. Certain things are zoomed in and out. The light might be distorted if you're wearing sunglasses. So what are the things when you put this pair of glasses on that you come to assume about the world? In fact, if you're critiquing or pushing back against the theory, oftentimes you're pushing back against the assumptions the theory brings to the table. For example, the idea that human beings are rational and make rational decisions. Well, that's something we could critique as an assumption because people don't always make the most rational choices. So symbolic interaction theory suggests that we use communication to create meaning. If I'm hungry, right, what do? Well, I tell people that I'm hungry. I look at a menu, right? I try to find ways to fulfill that human need. So we use communication to try to make sense of and develop meaning with each other. A key idea that motivates us is the idea of self-concept, right? Self-concept refers to the generally stable set of beliefs that we have about ourselves, about who we are, right? So if you were to look in the mirror and describe who you were looking back at, you might share a few different things. You might share some basic things like I'm a student here at EOU, I am this age, I'm 22, right? You might share that basic information. But are you a more introverted or extroverted person? Are you somebody that generally enjoys books, right? Those might be things that motivate your self-concept. How do you feel about yourself, right? And based on how you feel about yourself, that's going to push you in certain directions. So your behavior and the way that you communicate as an introvert might be to be more interested in communicating via text, to be a little bit apprehensive about meeting people face to face, right? That might be a motivator for how you act. And then the other idea here is that the individual has a unique relationship to society. We think about the labels that we use to describe ourselves. If we're talking about things such as our gender, our race, or ethnicity, we're talking about like our interests, aspects of our personality, right? We have come to establish those relationships through society, right? We know our identity because we know how our identity fits against other people. In other words, we know who we are because we know who we're not. So this relationship is important to this theory too. Last class, I talked about some of the importance of developing a sense of symbols, right? In semiotics, the use of symbols is developing a stable set of understandings of how we engage with each other. We see this, right? This is pi, right? Pi standing in for 3.14159, et cetera, right? But we're using the pi symbol as kind of a universal understanding of this number and how the number is used in mathematical contexts, right? So the use of symbols is developed here to create a set of meanings. We use symbols to communicate with each other, right? So we use pi, we put in a little squiggle, right, in order to understand what 3.14159, et cetera, means to people. But we also develop symbols, including the use of language. The words and phrases that we communicate with one another are also ways that we use symbols. Symbols are standing in for and representing ideas, right? These ideas can be both very abstract and also very concrete. So for instance, if somebody says that there's great vibes, right? Well, it's a very abstract concept, but you kind of know it when you feel it, right? If you're vibing with somebody, if you're feeling good and enjoying spending time with them, that's something you experience, right? Versus something that's concrete, right? You might measure the amount of time you're spending with somebody. Like you have such a great conversation that like 2 hours have passed. And that might be a more concrete way to represent the amount of time that you spent with that person. And we use symbols to create the world, right? Anytime you're looking at a billboard or advertisement, or anytime you're reading anything or talking, you are using symbols to arrange the thoughts mentally in your head and get those thoughts out there. This also suggests that over the time and process of developing symbols, right, we can develop symbols that carry a lot of significance, meaning, and importance to different groups. So for example, here we have the peace sign, right? This is an example of a symbol that has developed complex and significant meaning. One of the biggest ways this was used within the context of protests to the Vietnam War, right? We look at a lot of culture surrounding Vietnam War protests. We look at culture like hippie culture. We might associate the peace sign in that context a lot, right? So the symbols that we develop have a lot of significant meaning in that regard. We might think about the way that like, you see a red hat with white text on it. What do you think, right? That's an example of how significant symbols have been developed over time too. So symbolic interaction theory was developed by George Herbert Mead, who was a Chicago philosopher who was really interested in language, right? And how we develop language and utilize language with each other as human beings, right? So Mead came into this with an understanding of a little bit about language, but why language was important. So this was developed as abbreviated as FI, and this comes from two different schools of thought, right? So sometimes when we look at a theory is coming from a few different perspectives, philosophers, academics, people who have studied and developed the theories, don't always come in from the same point of view. So we had two different perspectives, the Chicago and Iowa school, that differed in terms of whether symbolic interaction theory was something that we could measure and study kind of through scientific experimentation, or whether it was something more qualitative that we could study through the process of doing things such as interviews and observation of the human experience, right? Quantitative is much more number and data driven, Qualitative is much more about information that is not necessarily transferable, right? People have sometimes said quantitative is memory, qualitative is feeling. Another key idea here in the development of symbolic interaction theory is the role of self-concepts, right? So self-concepts refer to a set of generally stable beliefs or thoughts that we feel, right? And we develop our self-concepts through our interactions with other people. Again, we develop an element of self-concept the minute we get a birth certificate, right? It tells us certain things about us, including our name, the sex that we've been assigned at birth, right? It tells us a number of things about ourselves that we might choose to continue to have and use to express ourselves throughout the rest of our lives. If you think about the words that you would use to describe yourself, you might ask yourself, where do those come from? And those develop your sense of self-concept. And then meaning is how we're interpreting and making sense of those things in a social way. So again, if somebody were to describe themselves as outgoing, what does that mean, right? What does that self-concept translate to? Generally, that might mean that you're initiating a party or a social relationship or a gathering. You're checking in with a lot of people. You tend to talk a lot, right? Meaning is what you attribute to what being extroverted means. And then mind refers to how we kind of mentally within our own heads use language in order to convey that meaning to other people, right? Think about like language and the use of symbols, including the use of words and the way those words are arranged as like the method of delivery, right? You're delivering a pizza, right? Pizza is your thoughts. You're putting it in a box. You're getting it in a car. You're moving that over. You're delivering that meaning and communication to other people. So in other words, right, we are constantly evaluating ourselves in relationship to our other people around us, right? And sometimes we do this because we experience like jealousy or peer pressure. Maybe we have siblings and we're comparing how we're doing to other siblings. Maybe we have friends or roommates and like, you know, we're both vying for the same scholarship or we're both trying to get on the varsity team, travel, right? So we use that competition in that way. Sometimes we feel the idea of like FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. We compare what we have in social opportunities to what we feel like the other people are doing. So we figure out who we are as we connect to others. We develop the idea of thought, right? The inner conversation with ourselves. For instance, we might say, oh, I'm going to be so bad at this party because I am such an introverted and withdrawn person, right? Based on how you feel about yourself, you are kind of psyching yourself up to behave or think in a different way. Role taking, right? So if you have seen or read To Kill a Mockingbird in high school, you might be familiar with Atticus Finch, his famous phrase to describe empathy, putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and walking around in them for a while, right? That's the idea of role taking. Imagining what things are like from somebody else's point of view. So for instance, maybe you are wearing a nice outfit for a date because you're imagining how that date might be looking at you. You want to present well to them, right? And you want to speak about topics that get them laughing, that get them interested in you, right? So you are taking on the perspective of another person to understand how you relate to that, right? In interpersonal communication, we talked about the idea of the looking glass self. That is an imagined performance. In other words, imagine if you know, you were outside of your body, like you were a ghost looking at yourself. What would you do? How would you behave? Right? What would you look like to an outsider? That's the idea of the looking glass self. Imagining how we look to other people. So there's also the Pygmalion effect, right? This is the kind of self-fulfilling prophecy that we at times find ourselves with. For instance, maybe you have a coach, and every single time you work with that coach, you feel like you're always underperforming. Like you're not like running, you're not lifting, you're not working at the level you know you can, but you kind of psych yourself out a little bit and get a little bit anxious when you're working with this coach. Sometimes we let the expectations that other people have shape the way that we're working and communicating effectively. So sometimes we find that because somebody thinks we're not going to do well, we don't do well, right? Or sometimes people really coach and hype us up well, and we do well as a result. So oftentimes we're moderating the way that we communicate, the way we behave, and the way that we act in an effort to kind of mirror or match how other people look at us. And we don't always do that intentionally. We have what are known as particular others, right? These are people that might be family members, close friends, people that are important to us and really matter. Particular others are especially crucial in terms of developing a self-concept. If somebody were to realize, oh, I don't think I'm a computer science major anymore. I think I'm an art major, right? And they come to realize that change about themselves, their identity, and their interests, they're oftentimes more likely to share that with a particular other because they value their opinions, their perspectives, right? A lot of the way that we communicate, including our style of communication, our accent, that might be dictated by particular others as well, people that are important. And then generalized others refer to the general mass of society, people as a whole, right? So if you think, for instance, about the use of social media activity, if you use social media, like you have a LinkedIn page, or you are among the dwindling people who still use Facebook or created one in the first place, you have like the public profile, right? How do you appear to other people in general? What posts appear? What photos appear of you? And then you have like what appears to your friends. So people who you have accepted, maybe people that you like haven't talked to in a really long time, but like still are kind of in your inner circle. Who are the close people that you talk to? People you message regularly, that you have contact with, and so forth. So depending upon the degrees of separation between you and the other person, the importance of them matters. We also do care about how we present to a larger public or group. For example, if we present publicly on social media, we know anybody can see it. So we are presenting perhaps a professional photo or perspective of ourselves that we want the larger public to understand and to engage with. So every theory that we go over in this class is going to have critique, right? It's going to have pushback, and it's going to have statements and ideas that are shared that essentially show where this theory might be incorrect, right? So if this theory is contending that we develop and utilize symbols and that our relationship to society is important for the process of generating meaning, this theory tends to focus a little bit too much on the individual, right? On our self-concept about how we develop a sense of identity and use that sense of identity, right? But our sense of identity is developed in the context of society. In other words, how we come to even establish self-concept, well, that's dictated a lot by our social relationships. So sometimes this theory goes a little bit too far in saying that we are the people who develop self-concept ourselves. This is also a very broad theory, right? Essentially, this theory is getting at the idea that we use symbols and we develop symbols to communicate and share who we are. Maybe, for instance, you're a big fan of a particular musician or band, right? You put on that shirt, you wear that, and that is symbolized through your interactions, right? My partner loved to go to the Grand Rod Fitness Center, like wear a Rage Against the Machine t-shirt, listen to like 2000s pop punk, right? And like blast it in the basement of the gym. And it was a lot of fun, right? That can be a way of communicating and sharing yourself. But again, symbolic interaction as a theory, as a broad understanding of our relationships, it can sometimes miss some nuance here. And one of the other challenges here of developing and conveying symbols is emotional depth and complexity, right? Oftentimes, it's not just about our stable set of views, but how we're feeling at the moment. Maybe we're really interested in being an art major, but we're anxious, confused, we're uncertain if that's a good idea for us. So sometimes the challenges and depth that we have to deal with our emotions are not quite things that symbolic interaction theory is fully getting at, right? So again, this is a useful theory, but it's a very broad one. And sometimes in that breadth, it's missing some of the nuance of how we come to develop and articulate our identity to others. So I wanted to show a trailer from the film Inside Out. How many people have seen this movie before? So most of you, yeah. So this is a good example here of applying symbolic interaction theory for a number of reasons. First of all, the characters, right, in this film are human emotions, right? So you have anger, fear, sadness, joy, and envy, and they all are representing major human emotions that we have, right? And this idea here that these characters are symbolizing or standing in for human emotions deal with symbolic interaction. How we develop and utilize symbols in a social setting? Well, we develop the symbols of emotion as a universal way of expressing those symbols across a broad audience. I think one of the most interesting examples of how this is used is this film is actually used as a teaching and pedagogy tool, particularly for children with developmental disabilities, right? Who might have greater difficulty understanding the emotions that they experience or understanding how to differentiate emotions. So as a tool of teaching, this film is actually used so that children can develop like a concrete image, like anger is this like, you know, this red guy who is kind of blowing his top all the time, right? And they can better understand when they're feeling angry, a kind of personification of that emotion too. So through the development and use of symbols, children and adults alike can kind of attach to a set of ideas, beliefs, values, and perspectives that are shared among us and used effectively as a form of communication.
So, how was the first day of school? Fine, I guess. Oh, do you ever look at someone and wonder what is going on inside their head? Did you guys pick up on that? Sure. Something's wrong. We're gonna find out what's happening, but we'll need support. Signal the husband.
Uh-oh, she's looking at us. What did she say? What? Oh, sorry, sir. No one's listening. Cigar time. We left the toilet seat off. What? What is it, woman? What?
Signal him again.
Ah, so, Riley, how was school?
Oh, you can't be kidding me. For this, we gave up that Brazilian helicopter pilot. School was great, all right? What was that? He said we were gonna. Everything okay?
Sir, she just rolled around, got us. All right, make sure, of course, I don't have to put the foot down. No, not the foot, Riley. I do not like this new attitude. Oh, I'll show you attitude. No, read.
What is your problem? Just leave me alone.
No, reporting high level to Sam. Take it to DEFCON 2. DEFCON 2. I don't know where this disrespectful attitude came from. You want to be to the top?
Yeah? Well,
Prepare the foot. Chief, to take the position. Ready to look at your command, sir.
So kind of a fun example here, right? Where you literally are seeing like the emotions in the people's heads, right? That are symbolizing anger, fear, disgust, envy, joy, etc. Right? And then we see like how the characters are behaving when like the different emotions take the wheel. So anger's taking the wheel, right? And he is like kind of letting the characters like express their disgust. We see it visually, right? We see their eyes grow, we see their volume raise, we see like an expression of that emotion. We also, right, can understand the use of nonverbal communication, like the way that the parents, like we're using eyes to try to get the father to communicate to the daughter and check in about her life, right? We use a lot of nonverbal communication as sort of code for trying to engage with each other too, right? All that to say, symbolic interaction theory is getting at how we might develop and utilize these symbols to convey a lot of human experiences and thought. Like, and a lot of children's animated films do a really good job of like trying to use those images and symbols to convey human ideas too, right? We might think about other examples such as, you know, Toy Story, talking about the joy and experience of us kind of playing, having toys, and those kind of coming to life, right? So there are a lot of different examples here of how culture, popular media is utilizing symbols in order to convey human experience and apply those symbols in a meaningful way. So what I would like you to think about here is I'd like you to take some time to think about some of your close relationships, such as family members, close friends, and I'll be asking you as a part of your attendance, first of all, to share if you have any unique ways that you communicate with people that are close to you. For example, maybe you have certain inside jokes, gestures, stories, or experiences that you exclusively share with people close to you. And secondarily, I want you to take some time to reflect. How do you feel like your relationship with other people has impacted your own self-concept. And you might think about one specific relationship that you feel like does a good job of explaining your self-concept as well. So give you some time to work on this on your own. Encourage you to get out a separate sheet of paper or use this through typing to send it an email so that you have it separate from your notes. They'll be asking you to turn that in just a little bit. I'll give you another minute or two to work on this. When you have finished working on this part of the prompt, I would like you to turn to find 2 or 3 other people to work with. And in your groups, I'd like you to take some time to share some of the things you wrote about how you communicate close to you and how they impact your self-concept. And as you're listening to other folks share their perspectives, take notes on your attendance about particular things that stand out to you. So you can continue to work on part 1 if you need to, but when you're ready, turn around, find some folks that might be sitting near you that you'd like to work with. Take a moment to share each other's names and take some time to exchange some of the thoughts and things that you developed.
Yeah. So I have the prompt from you. Like it didn't necessarily.
So first off, and I'm talking about right, yeah, so one thing, yeah. Now, you know, my
Like I said,
it'll be telling us where you're at.
and I'll talk about different things.
Whatever. Or another time.
I don't know. If it's something that
You know,
would
like,
be-
yeah, and there's a part meeting. And remember, I talked to you. Hopefully the mind of people It's a now.
Yeah. And for the second one, I kind of talked about, like, that one, the things they said to me, but like, maybe those concepts within council, because I don't understand. Like, it's too easy to do their way to I don't know, my mom knows somebody who's very supportive. So I did nothing like. Like, my mom was there. So I guess. It really helped me, like, sense of importance, I guess.
Take another minute to wrap your discussions up. I won't say this. It's definitely something.
Yeah, they'd be like, oh.
I'm trying. People I don't. Mainstream music.
Go ahead and finish your current thought. Let's come together.
It's all over. I don't know.
Specifically with my friends, like, because I didn't get the opportunity of that.
So I know some of the examples and things you might have shared in groups might be a bit personal, so I'm not going to ask you to share to class as a whole. But as I was going around and hearing some of you share, there were a few interesting things that came up. A lot of people mentioned that, like, things such as their sense of humor and the types of things that they find funny or things that develop with those close to them. Oftentimes, we feel like we like people close to us who get our sense of humor. Sometimes we find that our interests in things such as music are things that we develop with people close to us. We might bond over activities and things that we find to be, mutually interesting. So I wanted to do this to share some of the examples here of symbolic interaction theory, the idea that we develop our sense of self through how we communicate, and we communicate as a method of expressing and better understanding who we are, right? We use emotions, whether like visually depicted, things like anger, sadness, disgust, as we saw in that clip, or the way that we use and explain who we are to other people. Those are things that we develop and share through that process of symbolic interaction. So to wrap up for today, start to research some of the sources and points here. We use symbolic interaction theory to explore some of our human relationships and engagement. On Wednesday, we're looking at theory number 2, which is uncertainty reduction theory. So please either email or pass forward your attendance activity for the day. Make sure your name is on it. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you again on Wednesday.